How to find the chassis. Okay, so let's say that your carrier has to pick up a container from Barber's Cut Terminal and they do not have a chassis. So they're on their way to the port. They do not have a chassis. So as a dispatcher, you want to be a little proactive, and we're going to come to the DCLI website, DCLI.com, and we want to click on check chassis availability. We want to select our region. If you're unsure of the region, you can just hover over the marine regional pools here, and you can select the region that your carrier is in.
Are you interested in dispatching intermodal freight? A dispatching company that specializes in the movement of intermodal freight. You may ask, what is intermodal? Intermodal simply means the involvement of two or more modes of transportation in the conveying of goods. Let's just break that down. Exactly what does that mean? So, let's say, for instance, a ship has containers on it, and it arrives to a port in the United States. A trucker is assigned to a container that is on that ship at that port, and that trucker is going to go to the port and pick that container up and deliver it to its receiver or a warehouse. As the freight dispatcher, you're responsible for all the paperwork that is involved in that shipment. Join me in Dispatching Intermodal 101, where we dive deep into the dispatching process. We're going to go in the back office and show you everything that you need to know in order to be able to make that transition or that shipment as smooth as possible. Not only in Dispatching Intermodal 101 do we show you how to dispatch intermodal freight, but we also show you how to find intermodal carriers, how to locate and bid on intermodal projects or intermodal freight, how to set up your company, the terminology like ERD and LFD. If you don't know what that means, that could cost your carrier thousands. We're going to show you how to register your carriers to be able to go in and work in the ports. The Dispatching Intermodal course has over 57 lessons, 4 hours of audio and video trainings, templates for you to be able to implement and start dispatching right away in your business. Join us for Dispatching Intermodal 101.
Mine are in the Gulf. So I'm going to select Gulf. And then you want to scroll down and you want to choose the city that your motor carrier is in. My carriers are in Houston. All right. We have the locations. Okay. So that means chassis are available at these locations, or at least these are the locations where chassis are held. Okay. So we come here to see if they're actually available and how to get them and where these places are. Bayport Terminal is our port here in Houston, and so is Barber's Cut Terminal. The rest of these locations are container depots, okay? So a container depot is somewhere where they store containers. Usually they're empty containers, and they also will store chassis, okay? The section for info, simply the address, the open and close time of that particular depot. Just a note here, the close time, 30 minutes prior to the gate hour closing, they will stop accepting trucks. Okay, so it may say 7 p.m. here, but the last truck can go in at 6:30. It says 4 p.m. here, the last truck can go in at 3:30. Okay, so on and so forth. As it pertains to as it pertains to a chassis, this is the reason why we're sending our truckers here. We want to come and see what it looks like. So it shows 20-foot. There are 21 20-foot chassis. There are 53 40 chassis. There are 8 45-foot chassis. Okay. This particular Bayport terminal says close to bare drops of all sizes, meaning bare drops means a bare chassis. You cannot just leave your bare chassis at the Bayport terminal. Okay. It's okay to pick up under release DCLI 0419. So you can pick up bare chassis. Okay. So if my carrier was going to the port and he needed a 40-foot chassis to be able to grab the container, they're showing me that there's 53 40-foot chassis at that particular port. Okay, so I have confidence that when my carrier gets to the port, he's going to be able to find a 40-foot chassis. He'll be able to pick up his container. Okay, great. It's also saying, please terminate OESZDFLZ prefix chassis to DCLI markings at CMC. This means if we were to pull out a 40-foot chassis from this from Bayport Terminal, we would have to terminate. Terminate means return, get rid of that chassis at CMC, because if it had this prefix, okay, we cannot drop it here at Bayport Terminal. So we would come down here to CMC Houston. This is where you would tell the motor carrier that he can drop that chassis. Okay. Let's go on to CNC empty yard. So let's say my motor carrier wanted to pick up, he needed let's say for instance, we got to Bayport Terminal and he got there around 11 a.m. and there were no more 40-foot chassis, meaning that everyone came and got all of those chassis. They didn't update the DCLI site. All of the chassis were gone. So my carrier will now be looking for a 40-foot chassis. Well, I would send him to CNC. Why? Because CNC says they have 108 chassis. Okay. It's going to be a higher chance for the chassis to be at CNC because this is just a depot. The port, every truck is going into the port. So it's going to be a higher chance that when the trucker goes into the port, they're going to grab a chassis and then grab a container. So unless my carrier is at the port very early, they run the risk of the chassis not being available. Okay, so we come to CNCs is open to bare drops, meaning that we can drop our chassis off here once we're done with it. And it says open to bare pickups. Depot does not require an email from DCLI prior to release, which is great. They does not require an email. Okay. If you can see over here at Con Global says Depot requires an email from DCLI, meaning that the dispatcher or the motor carrier would have to email DCLI and say, hey, DCLI, can you please email Con Global and let them know that I need to come and pick up a 40-foot chassis. Okay, so then DCLI will do just that. They will email Con Global and say, XYZ trucking company needs to come in and pick up a 40-foot chassis. This is the release. We give them authorization. Well, that's not required at CNC. Okay, so we would definitely want to try CNC first. If for some reason there's no availability at CNC, then we know our next step would be to contact Con Global. So guys, it is just that simple. In order to find a chassis, We want to come to the DCLI website first so we can give our motor carriers the heads up on where most of the chassis are available. So once you get a container, the container is either going to be at Barber's Cut or it's going to be at Bayport. But before I send my carrier to either port, I want to see what the chances are that they're going to be able to find a chassis if they don't have one already. Okay, so that's why we're here, and we can see just that. Okay, and just make sure that you're reading the comments to make sure that you're prepared for, you know, whatever it is that you're trying to do, because this one says close to bear drops, because your motor carrier may not be able to drop the chassis off at the port. Sometimes the port switches their availability to accept or not accept bare chassis. Okay, in the event that they tell the motor carrier you cannot drop that chassis here, we would come here to the DCLI website for chassis availability to see where we can drop the chassis. Because once we're done with the load, if we don't have any more loads, we want to get rid of the chassis. Why? Because the motor carrier is continuously being billed for the chassis if they still have it in their possession. Okay? That is chassis availability and how to find and terminate a chassis.